Welcome to the Behavioral View.
Hey everyone, would you like to get a CEU for this episode? Listen closely for the announcement of 3 secret words delivered throughout the episode. Take note of those words and we will tell you where to go to get your CEU when the show is over. Hi everyone and welcome to the Behavioral View, where we are kicking off our 2nd season. You guys excited?
Yes.
We didn't burn it all down.
That's right. I am Shannon Hill, the editor-in-chief at CentralReach Institute, and I'm here as always with Dr. Carrie Millico, who is our Director of Clinical Programming, and Dr. Rick Cabina, who is our Director of Research. And we have our very special guest today, Dr. Michael Mueller. And Dr. Mueller is the co-founder of Southern Behavioral Group, as well as Stimulus Publications. He's also founder of the International Behavior Analysis Organization, the IBAO, and he is co-author of the AFLs, which we are very excited to be bringing to our CR customers now. So Mike's got a wide range of experience working with people in their homes and in their schools, and has really spent a lot of time talking about and developing and helping to develop functional skills and even severe problem behavior support in the schools. So we've got a lot of exciting topics to cover here today. Thank you so much for coming, Mike.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me. It's a privilege. Honored.
So those of you who are interested in getting a CEU for watching this episode, you can do that very easily. We are going to be weaving in some secret words throughout the broadcast. Go ahead and write those down. We'll have a link under the video that will take you to the CentralReach Institute, where if you've already got an account, all you've got to do is click that link and it'll drop you right into this course, and you can answer those quiz questions to get your CEU. If you do not already have an account, it'll allow you to create one for free. So no worries, just go ahead and do that, and then you will find the course on your dashboard. And one thing that we are adding new this year to that quiz, there will be an optional question at the end, because we want to make sure we're bringing you guys the content that you want and get some ideas for speakers and panel presenters and such that you think would be good to have on the view. So if you have some suggestions on topics or panelists, go ahead and drop that in for us and we'll be looking at those. Well, we like to kind of slow start and get to know each other a little bit better with just what we call the question of the day. And today, our question is, would you like to mention someone who has greatly influenced you but does not know it? All right. Who wants to answer the question of the day first?
I'm happy to go forward. Or our guest could, since I cut him off.
No, either way. You know, I've had, over the last couple of years, the pleasure of meeting and working with people and getting to know people all over the world. And it's perspective changing, because I think we get stuck in what we do repetitively in the area that we are at. And I guess sort of the privilege of U.S. special education laws and appropriate dissemination and ABA as an accepted industry, and topics related to perception of autism and developmental disabilities. And then you go outside of that bubble and you realize how different things are in different places. If the U.S. as a kind of progressive standard, you can go places and attitudes about developmental disabilities, intellectual disabilities, autism are 50, 60 years behind where we are. No ABA infrastructure, lack of appropriate dissemination, lack of standardized training, disinformation and misinformation on an equal scale about what ABA practice is and kind of what industry standards are. And I've met a lot of people working very hard in their local environments to change that. Alif Iftar, Mohammed Al-Mahari, Rachel Arnold, Adair Carden. I can go down at basically our professional advisory board list. Aliona Dumatris in Republic of Moldova. Her child was the first child diagnosed with autism in Moldova, and it was in 2006. So, like from a historical perspective, think about the implications of that, right? I mean, in 2006, our field was really, really growing with ethics and supervision and certifications. It's easy to recognize around here who's doing things appropriately and who's not. You can go back to the mid 40s and 50s to get autism diagnoses and at the time Asperger's diagnoses, and the perceptions in certain places is still kind of riddled with shame and embarrassment and hiding and these kind of things. And there's people really, really putting an effort and for no other reason just to better their local communities. I mean, they're working hard literally every single day, putting in the time, no insurance billing, no billing pipelines, really scrapping and scraping together resources to get appropriate training. And they're doing it really in really beautiful ways. And it's been very inspirational to be a part of that and support them.
That's great. Yeah. The whole scrapping and looking and trying to find resources reminds me actually of my own answer. So I'll just leap in right behind you. Early 90s in Mississippi, providing services in an institution. At that time, that was it. That was the end of the line for the service system. And I guess it probably still is if you end up in an institutional care. But I had to develop behavior plans, and there was no way to say, I don't know what to do, refer them somewhere else. This was it. So you had to find it. And anyone who is on my Facebook page, when we had Linda LeBlanc on with Tyra Sellers before, got to see my fangirl reaction to Linda LeBlanc. So I will give her a shout out now, because when I was a young practitioner and scrapping and a wide range of things that fell into my plate that I had to do, 9 times out of 10, Linda LeBlanc had done something and written about it and published it. And it got to the point that I just thought, wow, she's not that much older than me. Why is she so much better than me? Why is she so much further along than I am? So she's helped me out in ways that she has no idea. So I'll just say thank you to her here and now. How about you guys?
Well, those are 2 hard ones to follow up. When I think about, I've always had a love affair with science, which is what attracted me to behavior analysis when I was an undergrad. I didn't know it back then, but I've always loved science, and I love our field because it's the science of behavior. And I have been influenced by many people, but this question is someone who has influenced us who wouldn't know it. And when I think about behavior analysis as a science, and I think about, people will sometimes say, who are the top behavior analysts that you think of? One person who has significantly influenced my thinking, I've read his books, I've read his articles. Every time he talks, I listen to him, and that's Dave Palmer. He is just absolutely brilliant, and he channels his perspective when he talks about behavior analysis. I think it's so pure, and it's so close to where we are, where our science started. And I really appreciate that. And that has helped me become a better scientist. And I can't, and I suspect this one time I wrote a paper, and I really think it was him as the reviewer, because it was such an obscure topic. And I actually talked to him one time about it, and he might have forgot this, but the review that I received was so spot on. And there was like this mathematical thing that I didn't even remember. Like, we messed up, and he figured it out, which was incredible. So I'm assuming that was him. Anyways, I'm giving him credit. So if I were picking someone, we're all influenced by people like you mentioned, Shannon, but that's certainly someone who has had a big impact on my thinking. His book with John Donahue on learning is, if you don't have it in your professional library, get it, because it looks at the complexity of our science. It looks at marrying biology with behavior analysis, and it's just frankly remarkable. So I'll stop gushing, but that's my answer.
That's the great thing about this question, is the opportunity to gush about people who really deserve it. So I'm glad you gushed.
Well, this one was kind of hard for me. I grew up in behavior analysis as a precision teacher, and it is common culture in that part of our field to brag about everyone that has influenced you. Like, it's on our chart. It is embedded in our presentation. So I really try to make it a practice to give shout outs and, begin presentations with people who have influenced me, especially if it's just like a talk that I'm giving as opposed to a symposium, stuff like that. So I really hope that everyone that has, greatly influenced me, they know it. But I will say, I had to really think about this, because I do. I try to make a huge effort in acknowledging people. But I will say that when I moved to Nevada for the second time, and I took this position working for the state as a behavior analyst, and as such, we were only allowed to work with clients who were funded through Medicaid, because no private agency was really taking on Medicaid clients. And before I would really, before I was in more academic setting with behavior analysis, and it was kind of those who could afford could pay. And the demographic that I was serving shifted greatly. And I have a huge thank you to all of those families for shifting my perception of what it's like to, go through just kind of the push and pull of various contingencies that they have to deal with, as opposed to being like, oh yeah, you can take data on this, and you've got all of these different sort of amendments and or different amenities and privileges that, this mom couldn't even afford to get gummies to, that her son loved, to man for, because she only had so much food in her budget for the food stamps that she was working from. Or this family, just none of them were working, and they couldn't afford to create some sort of printouts, just a simple printout for a food menu for their daughter to select from for different lunch options over the summer, or different strategies that we would take for granted because they didn't have a printer, stuff like that. So it allowed me to be more creative, more thoughtful, and change my perspective, even as a human, as I am a parent and I am a voter, over different issues around things with my years working with those families. So for them, I am internally grateful, and I think that I am a better behavior analyst and a better human because of them.
I feel like that could be a whole episode, just providing services for people who have limited resources, internationally, and it happens right here as well. Yeah.
All right.
True.
All right. Well, let's get into it then. So, Mike, one of the things that I know you've got a lot of experience with is just providing consultation services, be that in the schools or internationally. And you and I, full disclosure to our audience, chatted beforehand just to sort of lay out and think about the things that we wanted to talk about. And I thought you did a really good job of kind of laying out the different approaches to consultation in the schools But I'll ask you to kind of think broadly, consultation models in general. What do you use? What do you apply? Is it different when you're working in schools versus consulting internationally, that sort of thing?
Um, it's a good question. You know, some of this is, I think, largely unknown in the ABA world. It's not really discussed in many graduate programs. I don't think, in terms of like models of consultation, specifically what is the kind of theoretical background behind it, or what are the pros and cons of doing it. So I went to the University of Southern Mississippi, which has a behavioral school psychology program. It was 97 to 2001 on campus, and then a pre-doc internship after that. So I was in Mississippi at the same time you were.
I still am.
I overlapped with your Mississippi tenure. And, you know, it's cool going to different places because you get a totally different perspective. Mine wasn't very broad at the time because I was just entering into graduate school, but my way of making a little bit of money through the program was to be a behavioral consultant for rural and local school districts. So I've been consulting in schools really since 1997, 1998, even as I was learning. And I guess the predominant model of behavioral consultation is literally called behavioral consultation. It was mid 70s, I think 77, Bergen book, and it lays out a very indirect model. The idea in general is to, it's an indirect service model. It is to work with a consultee, which in the schools is a teacher, the basic problem identification, problem analysis, problem evaluation, and then continuing. But it's a didactic approach, which means if I was going into the school with this model, I would ask the teacher, what do you need help with? He or she would tell me the problems that they're having. We would conceptualize and try to boil down to a target behavior, and then we would come up with things together that might work. I would offer some strategies to that teacher, and then I would come back at some date down the road to evaluate, based on the teacher's perception of change, how those strategies worked. So it's a little bit of kind of sprinkling. It's indirect by design, and it allows the benefit of it, kind of big pictures. It allows one person to go in and help a lot of different people. So I can see this teacher, I can see this teacher, I can see this teacher, I can come back and see them all. But we didn't find it overly effective for more significant problem behaviors. I think you can do a lot of group contingencies. You can make a lot of good recommendations that are relatively easy to explain and get people to implement for class-wide support, or using more positives relative to behavioral corrective comments. So I'm not trashing out the model. It's been around for many, many years, and it's all some people have the time and availability to do. But our focus really at the time was more severe problem behavior. So aggression, self-injury, major disruptions and tantrums, things like, something's getting broken, somebody's getting hurt, those kind of issues. And that model didn't really hold up very well for that, frankly. But that's one particular camp that a lot of people coming up through school psychology, that's what they do. That's how they've learned it. That's what they continue to do in their careers. And then there was a book, Crowder, Will, and Bergen in 1990 that describes behavioral school consultation. And then in 92, Susan Sheridan came out with conjoint behavioral consultation. It's the same sequence of steps, but the consultee, instead of just being a teacher, is the teacher and a parent together. So it involves a broader perspective, but the steps are the same. So now you're working with multiple people to come up and decide really kind of what the problems are. You're working with multiple people to decide what's the best approach to do it. And you're working with multiple people to see if there's behavior change, right? So you're asking people about their perceptions of behavior change. You're not going in as the consultant and collecting any data. You're not doing any observations to collect data to graph to see if there's been behavior change. It's totally indirect and totally didactic by design. Now, I think the spirit of that is admirable. But also, I think in practice, if you're asking someone about their perceptions who's not even involved in the local environment or in the situation, right? And that's not to say a parent should have a role and a say in treatment planning and evaluation and things like that. But if you're asking them what the problems in the school are, it does lead to a little bit of back and forth and finger pointing. And anybody who's worked in schools has seen this. A lot of school problems are the fault of people at home and vice versa. There's always kind of little political issues going on. So like I said, I think the spirit of it, let's get everybody working together, let's get everybody at the table. And then you kind of still go through what we found to be a fairly ineffective, didactic, indirect process. Didn't help very much. And this is, it used to be the case that your consultation could be evaluated based on whether or not it affected child behavior, right? So if I trained a teacher and that teacher did what I trained them to do or attempted to do that, and there was some impact on the child, then the training would be successful, which is also kind of a step. It's really kind of, that's a two-step evaluation, if you will. So if I train the teacher and I want to see if the teacher's doing what the teacher was trained on, I need to observe teacher implementation. I need to do basically like a procedural fidelity check, a treatment integrity check. Whether that was a good plan or good strategies, maybe they did it exactly how they were trained, but it didn't work, right? So there's a difference between knowing the effectiveness of training somebody and knowing whether or not what that person was trained on was effective. And
also knowing that whether or not their behavior is the same when you're in the room doing the integrity check as when you're not, right?
Well, I mean, that's one of so many issues that's related to when you go in and talk to somebody and then you leave and then you come back, you don't know whether they did anything at all.
Right.
Frankly. Or the extent, to which they did it as you intended or reliably across a week period, a 2-week period. I mean, you don't have any of that.
Let me see if I got this correct, or if you said it and I missed it. But when you're saying it was purely didactic in nature, is that like you would gather information from the stakeholders of that setting without your own eyes on the learner and their problem behavior. So as such, the consultant would create a plan based on just the verbal reporting from the stakeholders of that situation. So you could have created the perfect plan based on that verbal report, but that perfect plan may not actually be the most appropriate given the true nature of the behavior that was exhibited.
I mean, yes. So that's behavioral consultation as a model. That's conjoint behavioral consultation as a model. You don't know. I mean, the breakdown can occur at any of those steps. You don't know if the information you're getting.
There's a lot of holes accurate, that we can poke a finger in here, it seems.
You're getting perceptions. You're getting perceptions of behavior from people that don't have any behavioral training. Mm-hmm. And anybody that's worked in this field for even a little bit of time in the area of behavioral assessment knows that the information you get back from people, depending on their training, needs really to be very cautiously considered, not as fact, but as someone's perception. If someone says that, we don't know why they're doing it, it happens randomly, it's out of the blue, and
we're also not. We're also not saying this from a position of like, I got behavioral training, I'm like, I need to be in charge. But it's like, if you want it to be effective, and these are, like you mentioned, some really concerning behaviors that I'm sure the stakeholders would want to decrease immediately. And I'm sure, behavioral consultants, as any consulting gig out there, doesn't come cheaply, right? So you want to make the best use of both time and money.
Yeah, and keep in mind, this. So my beginning of my graduate school experience was 1997, right? The BACB started in 1998. There were no BCBAs. This thing that didn't exist, right? So there were different people that were behavioral consultants, behavioral therapists, behavioral specialists, all these different things. And there was no unified approach. But so these were systems that were offered, sort of guiding the practice. But when you think about it from, like how people kind of do things now, at least how some people do things now, if you go in and you're working with the teacher and the teacher tells you this child has very significant aggression, I think it would be unethical to have an hour-long meeting with them to try to teach them FBA and functional analysis and then send them back into their classroom to do all that and say, let's review what it is you did a week later. And then based on your implementation and your results, then we can have some kind of treatment that I then want you to go in by yourself. It's a hands-off. Like I said, it's an indirect model by design. And I'm not trying to kind of, sit up on high and downplay the significance of it. It is like the mental health consultation has been effective in different fields, including schools, for decades. But I think as the field advances, so should the expectation about what we bring to bear as well-trained behavior analysts into those situations that didn't have the same opportunities previously. And like I said, and we know from training literature, and we've contributed to some of that didactic instruction alone is a really poor method of trying to have someone do something with integrity. There's great studies. Jim Moore did a great study on training staff to do functional analysis conditions, right? So he listed out scripts, literally explained it to them, talked it to them, gave them a test. They answered everything with 100% accuracy. Then he evaluated whether they were, implementing the conditions correctly, and they're doing it with like 40% accuracy.
Sure.
That's typical of what you can expect with just a straight kind of talking didactic only methodology. So,
which is not a criticism of those people, because me being trained as a behavior analyst probably maybe didn't even hit 40% when I first implemented things that I had read and studied about and been taught directly by Brian Awada, so that I want to just be really clear that I don't think that you're saying this either. It's not a slap about the abilities or inabilities of people who haven't had strict ABA training. It doesn't mean that they're somehow less able. It's just that you just need so much direct support to learn these skills. There's a lot happening in those rooms, especially if the behavior is super severe.
Secret word number 1, model.
Oh, absolutely. It's, so even, from an assistantship position that I had in 1997, I was the only behavioral resource that these little schools had, period. They were thankful to get it. They were thankful to get the sprinkling. And there's, in Georgia, I'm in Atlanta, so our consultation company is all around Atlanta and other parts of Georgia and sometimes other states. There are very, very few BCBAs employed by school systems, and the ones that have them, Georgia's organized by county. So there's a sometimes literally hundreds of schools, and they may have 2 or 3 BCBAs. They really don't have the time given to them to go in to do what we do as consultants, where we can say we're working with this one particular student for X amount of time. It's like it would be like having one nurse or something for 10 schools or 50 schools. You just don't get the same amount of interaction that someone may have if there's a fully staffed clinic or something in a school district. So I'm not, trying to be overly negative about these other systems, but it's really kind of in the context of, I think a lot of BCBAs and ABA in general doesn't even know about different models of consultation, that there are these different camps that people prescribe to and follow and do things in a certain way. I think, at least from my experience, a lot of people sort of wing it. Not that they're doing inappropriate or ineffective winging it, but there's not a model, there's not a blueprint in advance that they know to follow when they go in. But there are models of consultation that have been well described and and well supported in the school psychology literature for a long, long time. So recognizing that didactic training models are ineffective, Stuart Watson, who was at Mississippi State at the time, came up with direct behavioral consultation. And what he added to the consultation equation was direct training models. So now if you wanted a teacher to do a preference assessment, you wouldn't, stand outside the doorway in the hallway and just explain what to do and then go have them do it. You would show them how to do it. You could role play it with them. You could model it with them. You could give them feedback as you watch them, implement some kind of procedure, something with somebody, but it was still hands off. The behavior analyst, the consultant, was not doing anything directly other than now doing more direct training and better training methods. So this is about the time where my behavior analytic career started. We were at Southern Mississippi. Stuart and his colleagues were at Mississippi State. So there was like a regional group of behavioral school psychology people who really got behind direct behavioral consultation. So that was my jam essentially until after graduate school. And when we started our consultation company, we really shifted from that model to a more direct implementation approach. And our thinking was, there's all kinds of different examples, but right, if you have an electrical problem at your house, you don't call an electrician to tell you what to do to fix it, right? You want them to fix it. If you have a problem with your car, you don't call a consultant in to tell you the things to look at under the hood, the things to fix. You want someone with specific training and certification and education to go in and do those things. And that's really a model that we adopted was if we get called in, we will work with the teacher, but we'll do the observations. We'll take their perceptions into consideration. We'll take other members of the IEP team's perceptions and considerations, into focus what we do, but weigh it appropriately with what we're actually seeing through a trained lens. And if we're going to do a functional analysis, that may or may not involve a teacher or staff, but we will be the ones to conduct it safely, to produce the results, and then come up with things, at least theoretically, that should be effective based on the results. And we can, and there's different ways to take other people's opinions in, but it still has to make theoretical sense in that if these are the results, these are some things that should probably work. And you can get social validity feedback, in different ways to incorporate people's opinions in it, but it still has to be an opinion that lines up with theory and effectiveness.
Mike, I think that I'm guessing here, but I think that a lot of people who are trained in behavior analysis post like 2005 are going to be surprised at the things that you're saying about the way things work, and especially if they are doing ABA in a more typical clinic setting or home-based setting. So I just want to take a minute to say that the things that Mike is describing are not over, that we still have under-resourced states where sprinkling of behavioral consultation is still a factor. I closed my public school consulting business last year. It took me a while to let it go, even after starting at CentralReach, because of guilt. Because there was, if I left, who's going to do any of this? And one of the things that Mike and I talked about earlier when we met was that so much of it has to do with developing these relationships with these schools. So we have very small school districts in Mississippi. You can have one in the county and one in the city, and two, if there's 2 cities in a county, you can have 3 districts. So their budgets are very small, and they have to make these decisions on where they're going to put the money. And if I can go in for 5 consecutive years and do what Mike is describing, just focus on one kid, just focus on one teacher and developing this partnership and this skill, then they're a lot more likely to invest that money in those services again, because their expectation is they do want someone just to come in, listen to what the teacher says, tell the teacher what to do, and get out, because that's all the money that they've got. And it's still very much of a challenge. So it's one of those places where I feel very passionately that behavior analysis has got to do some advocacy work to show that what we do does require this expertise, this specialization. We do need to be investing in more people to put in schools directly to do this type of work, rather than just relying on this consultation, which I'm a consultant and have loved that work. So let me say, I'm not against consultation. I'm saying that you have to have people embedded in that district who know how to take a plan once it's written. In some states, you don't even have to have the behavior analyst write the plan. They just have to do the functional assessment, and the IEP team writes the BIP. So there's a lot of ways that there's breakdowns in.
Most of Nevada is rural. We have like 2.5 cities. And
I'm interested in the half of the city,
like,
but
I
go
gotta
ahead.
give it a little bit of a year and a half. But
Okay.
I would drive every other month to a school 5 hours away from Reno to consult with a school for a few years. And it was about a specific case, and I would work with the special ed teacher. She was new and new to autism. But one thing, I would love to get your all's opinion on this, since all 3 of you do a lot in the schools, is that I found myself wanting to, and I would inch myself a little bit forward in every meeting, being like, okay, yes, we're addressing this one concern that you have, right? And it always starts off with the behavior that they're looking to reduce. So much of my focus and interest are the behaviors that we're looking to accelerate, right? And so I wanted to also help her with her skills in general for the kids that were not just this one kid. And so keep on like trying to inch and like help shape and transform some of her skills to be applicable across clients, as opposed to just, even though, yes, we were there for, and like 99% of what we did was about that client. But how do you find yourselves not wanting to be like, all right, so I'm going to go and I'm going to create this whole system for y'all, like, because you know that you can do it, and you know you want to do it. You know if they take it on, it will be magical, right? As opposed to being like as you said, like the buy-in and the money and stuff like that may not always be there. But I think it's more about, for this school, actually, they were, without giving away too much, they were in a particular part where they actually got a lot of money. And so they had some money to throw, but it was there. They were nervous about too much change. And so, and then there's always politics that are involved. So it's like, well,
Right.
Whoever is the superintendent or the person in charge of special schools, or I forget what position it was called, right? So,
that was actually going to be my answer, and I'll let Mike answer more in depth than what I'm going to say. But my short answer is, number 1, win the teacher over. Number 2, win the principal over. And number 3, win the SPED director over. Because if you don't have good relationships with any of those people along the way, you're dead.
We had it with all 3, and then that top guy moved into a new position, and we're like, oh, there it goes.
Yeah, yeah, it's a constant issue, but
Yeah.
you have to keep those relationships going. And the other thing that I learned once social media took off, in a way, I was very lucky to be in the state that I'm in, because in some states, behavior analysts can't even take data on teacher behavior. Yeah, it's
considered a form of
mhm.
performance evaluation that
Yep,
needs to
only the
come
principal
from.
can do it. Yeah,
Yeah, there's we've but
yeah,
to carry to your point, and Shannon, exactly what you said, it boils down to rapport. Honestly, it's shaking hands, it's knowing who to talk to, it's knowing who to have a relationship with, and these are the things we've always kind of considered. Behavioral consultation in schools.
Mhm.
There's an art to it, and there's obviously the science part behind it. But you have to be comfortable, leading meetings of 20 people and attorneys and advocates, describing what you did and how you did it and why you did it and the theory behind it. Overcoming less informed opinions, I think sometimes relying on data, but you also have to, there is definitely the perception that one, if and there's a balance I think that needs to be struck. But when you're in a school, the school feels like you're working for them, and that's an educational part that from an ethical perspective, you're working on behalf of the child in a school, even though you got the referral from the school. So there's sort of a tightrope to walk with respect to how that's all presented. But you have to let people know you're in the building. You have to know those people, and they should know what you're doing and why you're there. And our experience is teachers are so used to people coming in at different amounts of time, doing a half-day observation, leaving some recommendations, and then they never see them again.
yeah, yeah.
And this happens repeatedly. And so the way that we've done things is totally different than that. And the response that we get overwhelmingly is very, very satisfying to the teachers, because someone else is doing something. A lot of times, by the time you get in there, the teaching staff doesn't want a particular student in the classroom.
They've already,
Oh yeah,
made
and,
their
and you can understand why. Obviously we don't put the negative interactions, as the fault of the child, like blame them. But that's based on our behavioral education and the perceptions that we have and the experiences that we've built up. But it's not hard to tell why a teacher who's getting bit every day would want someone out of their room so they stop getting bit.
of course. Yeah.
When you go on to gently explain to them that, not only are they not leaving the room, but you're going to do X, Y, and Z with them, more and more and more.
Initially,
it has to be done in a way. Yeah, it has to be done in a way that, that they understand why. And once you do those things, then you won't get bit, and you can sort of kind of fade those things out and go back to the way it was. But it's a process. But anyway, like when you first get into a classroom under a more direct training or a consultative model, you are not asking other people to do more for you. You're doing the assessments, you're doing treatment analyses, you're helping them problem solve with things that are going to be effective. And we leave, basically our model is to go in, do functional behavioral assessment, which at different times has included different things. We do interviews, but frankly, I don't think that's I know it's not an incredibly valid method relative to the functional analysis outcomes. There used to be all kinds of rating scales that we would do. Like over the years, we've kind of changed, but it used to be interview, rating scales, record review, observation, functional analysis, and it kind of followed a particular path. The most valuable part of that is observation. Rating scales are basically invalid. Teacher interview is great information, but not necessarily great information relative to the function of behavior. The observations are being in the classroom long enough that your reactivity, the teacher's, behavior change, if you will, subsides. So when you're really in there for days, when things are operating normally, then as a trained behavior analyst, it's quite easy to see sometimes at least what the possible functions are, so you know what to test in a functional analysis.
Secret word number 2, curriculum.
Can we
So-
back up just a minute to the
Sure.
teacher interview, because that's something I got a lot of strong opinions about too, and I think sometimes it shortcuts when I've had students working with me to kind of talk about what we're using that for. We use it for on a couple of different levels. One is to identify what are the times that we need to observe. When is the problem behavior likely to occur? All right, but also we always observe when the problem behavior is not going to occur, and that is just overlooked completely in the behavior analytic literature. You need to see those situations where the problem behavior isn't occurring so that you have a contrast. So I want to talk to that person. Tell me why this doesn't happen in your classroom. And then I want to go into that classroom and see for myself. But the other reason that we use our interview stuff for is to find out what the priorities are for the teacher in that classroom. What are they tolerant of? What are they not tolerant of? And little things like teachers have one planning period. Special education teachers, if they are self-contained, sometimes don't get that. Because they will still have kids in the classroom during their planning period. When is a good time for me to talk to you? Because we have lost rapport because we've only got 2 hours in this school district, or 2 hours in this school, and we got to get this information, and we just track down this teacher on their planning period, and that is the only time they had in the day to get something done or just to get their brain cells working the way they want them to. So it's a rapport building exercise as much as it is information gathering for us anyway. Do you find that, Mike?
Yeah, I think the usefulness of the interview varies kind of depending on the situation. Sometimes we'll get a referral and all we'll get is a teacher's name and a student's name. We don't know necessarily what the problem behaviors are. So we have to work with them to kind of prioritize, because if you just say what's going on with this kid, which is what we'll say sometimes, you might get anything from, well, he has autism, as if that is just an explanatory, context that explains everything that happens, or you get a laundry list, or you get one particular thing that might be more aggravating to the teacher, but not necessarily the most destructive thing or whatever else. So we used to have kind of a much more formal process, or at least sequence of steps that we would follow. And we would try to do, like what you just said, a teacher interview where you pull them out, get the history, kind of get the whens, the perceptions, the list, those kind of things. And then you would do observations. And we've been a lot more flexible with that over the years, because I think sometimes if you do some observations, just touch base with the teacher, do some observations first. When you go back to do kind of a pull-out interview, you then have some things to relate back to the conversation. So, okay, what you're talking about is that what happened over here. And we've seen both sides. We've been in interviews where the teacher really sort of downplays it, and then you get in there and there's really quite violent behavior going on in the classroom. Or you see this picture of a monster painted and you go in the classroom and it's more like, touching and annoying, and what you had in your mind, like really severe aggression, turns out really probably not to be that at all. So I think it can help, funnel the staying on track anyway of the interview process, and save some time if you have a little bit of observation under your belt before that happens. So sometimes, occasionally, like, we won't even do a pull-out interview. We will just have brief conversations during the times that we're there to observe, and just kind of put all that stuff together and consider that the interview from these briefer conversations. So if you see something happen, you're observing it when it stops or whatever, then you can go and kind of touch base with the teacher.
Teachers are also, they're very, by and large, they're very dedicated, at least the ones that I've known, and especially special education teachers. I've had many of them say, I don't want to talk to you at all during the school day, but I will call you from my cell phone when I leave here. And they will. So a lot of times it's just a matter of being flexible to the way they want to participate.
It's an incredibly difficult job. Mm-hmm. It really, truly is. And many, obviously no fault of their own, they haven't been trained in certain behavior management techniques or expectations, and some are in situations where they receive very, very little support. Yeah. Frankly, just not to any fault of their own. They're just in situations where they're absolutely doing the best they can. They're overwhelmed. They don't know what to do from a research perspective, a theoretical perspective. They're trying to keep things safe and harmonious in their classrooms, and they don't have a lot of support from their school districts coming in behind them to help change any of that.
And frequently the teachers that are working with the kids that have the most needs are the newest teachers, because the ones with tenure have been able to say, I've done that. I'll go do the inclusion support now. Thank you. Yeah, so they need the most and they're getting the least.
Yeah. So there's some incredibly challenging situations. And I think because of that, when we go in to do, our work in the classrooms, if nothing else, it gives that particular person a break from a very problematic environment and context. We will work with kids in the classroom. Sometimes we'll partition off little areas. Sometimes we'll work with kids in different rooms, or if the class is out of the room for a certain period, we will work with the student in the classroom. I mean, there's all kinds of different considerations and all that, but the fact that we're doing it means that person's not. And a lot of times they're very thankful for that alone.
Well, can we pick back up?
I was going to say,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Carrie.
A pivot question.
All right, we may have been going in one direction. Go ahead.
Maybe not, but given the confines of the pandemic, and given, as we've all mentioned, the need and lack of resources for rural schools, have you all experimented with teleconsultation, the effectiveness of that model? I have a good friend who does school consultation, Dr. Bridget Fernotful, out here at UNR, and she's been experimenting with some robots that do that, and she's been pretty successful. But I was just seeing if you guys in practice have been able to the robots are kind of expensive, but if I hadn't found grants to do anything like that, or been have some schools that found any sort of that type of, because I'm sure that could also be a cost savings to the school too, because me traveling 5 hours, that was kind of expensive, just the traveling costs.
Those robots aren't as expensive as you think. I've been doing research with robots, and not necessarily in a consultative way, but you can get a robot for $500. It has a camera that will look out and give feedback, and they're developing all kinds of applications where now robots can deliver tests and assessments. So there's that technology side. But then there's the other side where if you're going to watch people, I pretty much live my entire life via Zoom or Riverside or whatever that medium is. And that's just becoming more and more accepted. Does it create some ethical issues? I guess that's an open question in and of itself, but it's a great topic to bring up. And I think that's a way to help people in rural areas and many other places where it's not as easy to have access, and it could be more cost effective.
Right. Hers are a couple $1,000s, and it follows people around. Yeah.
The first time I read about that, or I don't remember, it might have been something I was actually watching, but oh my gosh, how wonderful it would be to have a robot that I could direct remotely so that I could look around the room and that would be able to deliver prompts to the teacher if it's time to deliver a reinforcer, or if they're not noticing something in the classroom that needs to be addressed. I mean, there's so many different applications that I've dreamed of, but have I had a robot? No.
So listeners, this means that Shannon is open to someone providing her with a robot.
Well, maybe
you just get a Roomba and type an iPad on it.
Like Sheldon in Big Bang Theory, right? Yes.
But
have you done anything, Mike? With
Again, our model is very hands-on, like literally hands-on, not figuratively, because we kind of specialize in the most severe behaviors probably that exist in public schools. This isn't, fidgeting and off task and looking out the window, kind of the ADHD type spectrum of presentation, but really more really significant things. Which is why the other consultative models, like I mentioned, are less effective, just because there's a long list of things, behavior and analytic principles and concepts that you have to be aware of and knowledgeable of and good at, frankly, to do good behavioral assessment, link that to treatment, train people how to do it, look at the breakdowns, if there are any, with the people who are implementing your treatments, analyzing effectiveness, all these kind of things that you can't just give somebody in a meeting in the hallway. But if you have a way to look in, you're already doing more than some of those indirect models are allowing you to do. If you can give in vivo feedback, and you can pull someone immediately and kind of coach them up on something, if you can flip the camera around and role play or model something, those are the effective training strategies. Now, I wouldn't suggest that someone run functional analysis conditions that way, but there's a whole bunch of classroom behavior problems that those techniques could probably be very effective at doing. We have
David Wacker's lab has done a lot of work on teleconsultation and teaching parents to do that, run the FA conditions, but it's very different to do something like that in a classroom, with a teacher who has they've got a lot of other responsibilities going on.
And the use of a robot
time.
could maybe not necessarily replace in-person visits, but maybe increase the span between in-person visits, and then also increase your eyes on. So even if, let's say, you're still doing the monthly in-person visits, but then now you can do weekly spot checks with the computer. So your presence is now even more involved.
That was definitely my dream for it when I saw it. Once we had done the assessment and trained the plan, just to be able to do drop in, or for them to use the robot to call us and say, "Look,
you haven't been able to see this every time that you've come, but now it's happened." So maybe a low frequency, highly urgent behavior, like this is like really profoundly impacting when it happens. Yet it rarely happens, and so your spot visits are never able to capture it.
Yep. We've had pretty good luck with people getting consent to video in classrooms, depending on the situation. And it's the same thing, whether it's synchronous robot observation that you get to consume somehow, or it's recorded or whatever the other media might allow you to do. It's the part about a trained person observing and then being able to filter out the opinions and perspectives of people who aren't looking at things the same way, frankly. That's the most important part of that section of the process, I think. So we haven't really had to do much of that, frankly. The Georgia schools were closed essentially March of 20 through the summer. Some had a late start in August. Georgia schools start back either the end of July, which is really odd for some people, or usually the first week of August. Just about every school was back in August in some capacity. Some had a mixed year, but everybody's been back in 2021. So we've had some situations where we couldn't really move forward with some assessment things, but if people are trained, if there are therapists there, if there are parents who are implementing something, if there are teachers who are implementing something, and you simply can't be there, then I think those methods of observation and feedback and guidance can be really effective. And there's really good data behind some of this too. So it's not just my opinion, but even in more of some of the more hands-on things that you want to do, I think as long as you have access, to do it safely. And you can show people and you can role play and you can do some of those things, then I don't know that the important factor is just being, 2 feet away from them, as long as those other conditions are met.
Well, Carrie, that was actually a really good pivot, and you're right. It wasn't the one I was going for. I was going to, part of while we've got Mike here, we definitely want to touch on functional living skills. And one of the things that's kind of hard to get taught a lot of times in schools are the functional living skills. So can you give us some tips on how to get that to be more embraced?
Yeah, I hope so. It was, I think a lot of people, their familiarity with assessments in the autism world are ABLS and VB-MAP, more recently PEAK, but they're typically young developmental skills assessments, developmental language assessments, things that are used in early intervention and young elementary. We spent a lot of time, years in different counties and different cities, everywhere we went, just trying to establish a model where you do an assessment and you let the assessment results dictate what to teach based on the results of that. And it seems incredibly obvious in 2020. It wasn't incredibly obvious in 2000, 2005, 2010, especially in rural counties where a lot of the information kind of moves from the city and kind of expands outward. So you have a lot of IEP teams, and not even just in the school, but school IEP teams deciding what to do at home, that were driven by people's perceptions about what we want this particular learner to do. Well, we want her to write her name. Great, she can't even hold a pencil, but we're going to work on name writing. And so to establish good assessment and then use the results, we sang that song everywhere we went. And then one day it was like, we're working with a much older crowd all of a sudden. And now when they're saying, what should we do? We don't have a great answer for it. The problem that we would see repeatedly, and we still do sometimes, you see, 15, 16, 17-year-old kids working on ABLE skills. The ABLES has been around since 2012, so it's 10 years old now. So we've had I personally had an incredible opportunity to go around to a lot of places and do some program evaluations and do trainings and get a lot of feedback about what people are doing or not doing. And a lot of it, frankly, it's sort of, it seems like there's pervasive, this is changing, but there has been pervasive negative perceptions about functional skills as if it's the fallback position. It's what you do when you really want to do doesn't work. Like, we want to do X, Y, and Z. It's not working. He's too old. Now we have to do kind of a functional skills curriculum. And my mission, ever since that's come out, is to change the perceptions about the importance of not choosing one or the other, right? It's not you're in ABLES or you're in AFLs. Like, functional skills happen for everybody at every age, in every situation, in every setting throughout the day. They're unavoidable from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed. And then sometimes after that, there are just things that everybody has to know. And if you wait to introduce this kind of wholesale change when they actually need the skills, then you've missed an incredible amount of time that you could have used to teach those. So instead of, we've been trying to really get people to understand it's not a which assessment are you using, but there's a period of time where those things need to be, the evaluation of early language, developmental language, conceptual skills, all these kind of things that are more traditionally taught, through elementary school, to start kind of fading in some of those other assessments so that you have a much broader perspective on the full range of things. So it's not just academic skills. It's not just developmental language skills. It's all the things that you need, socially and functionally, and everywhere in the school and everywhere in life is functional skills.
We tend to think of this in terms of special education, but I'm sorry, everything you're saying is reminding me of a meme that I just saw this morning that says, I'm so grateful that I had all that instruction in parallelograms instead of tax preparation, because when parallelogram season comes along, I'm going to be so
I had a similar conversation with my son's coding instructor, how like, oh man, nobody told us about the filter in the dishwasher, but yet we did all this other stuff in school, and we're learning about that through social media account on Instagram. You know, Mike.
And same with like
Right.
vocational training, that we went away, I don't know if this was everywhere, but for a while, here, if you decided to take VOTEC classes, you had to get a different diploma, and it had to be marked on that diploma, and it decreased your ability to be admitted directly into college. Now, that's been undone recently. I think we've definitely got a movement away from it, but there was certainly this period of time where everything had to be academics if it made sense or not.
That's the problem with the educational system. It has changed very little for many years. I mean, everybody's college bound. Most educational systems are set up to help foster that outcome. But, Mike, what you said really resonated with me. I wrote a chapter very early on as a professor on functional academics, and thinking about it as it's not an either or, because when I've done some consulting with schools, I've had teachers say, well, at what point do you think we should stop trying the academics and move into functional? It's this very dichotomous thinking that's very harmful, because as you point out, functional skills are with us through life, and we really need a retooling and people to understand what they think about when they're thinking about functional skills.
I want to add another layer to this, and sorry for squeezing some more lemon juice on this topic, but Mike, when you mentioned that some people are on like the ABLEs when they're 15 and stuff like that, I also think it's our society's ableist nature to be like, my child must look a certain way, they must communicate in a certain way, and we are hell bent to having them pushed in that direction. Well, the ABLEs teaches this type of communication and they must do it, as opposed to being like, I'm embracing my child where they're at and how they're communicating, like meeting their communication needs of where they're at now and stuff like that. Because I question the like if we weren't so tied in with our field, with our history around recovery, I wonder if we would still have clinicians saying, like, I'm still going to use all of these things because this learner needs to speak.
I think that's a great point. I've been in meetings where, I guess the best way to put it is, it's obvious to all the professionals that there should be a serious conversation about the realistic probability of certain goals being met in the learner's repertoire, and nobody wants to be the person. Nobody wants to have the conversation. Mm-hmm. If you get outside of the ABA literature and you look at language and communication, you look at relationships, you look at vocational training, you look at living opportunities, you look at safety, you look at abuse, you look at all these different things, there's really, really poor outcomes in general. Yeah. There's great longitudinal studies. There's studies like really sort of outside of the, if you don't read anything besides Java, you don't get this. But if you look at these other,
no,
there's no knock on Java, obviously. It's but it's like something you get a little, narrowly focused sometimes when all you're reading is
when
like
you have a narrow focus, it's hard for you to see the whole forest.
Outcomes in general, they're quite pessimistic. And a lot of times I'll do APLS training and I'll lay these things out, daily living skills deficits, and just really explaining sometimes, the relevance of IQ and the probability of moving, from one number to another number. And when people do these, longitudinal studies, 18, 17 years, they follow the same kids, and there's different groups at the end, and they do regression analysis. It always boils down to typically IQ score that's a predictor of which group on all kinds of different variables you'll get put into, or you'll find yourself into at the end of this. And it's how much intensive behavioral training on whatever the behaviors of interest are that you've had during that time. And there's great studies that show if you have intensive behavioral training on functional skills, the difference at the end, when someone's a teenager, they could have the functional skills of a 14-year-old, which are incredible. Decision making, I've had a 14-year-old daughter, and I have a 12-year-old. And a 14-year-old's independent living skills are quite advanced. And compare that to a 5-year-old's. And that's the type of difference you can get if there's been training along the way in these specific areas. But if it's not included, then there is no chance to that. So the tale I try to tell is, if we want the next outcome studies to be different, then we have to do things differently with the same kind of populations. Otherwise, we're continuing to repeat the same mistakes. And if we want kids to have safer lives, less abuse, better living options, better relationships and social skills, better opportunities for living arrangements, and all these other really life kind of metrics, we have to prepare them differently, or those things won't change.
And if we're going to do that, behavior analysts have to know that kids do get beyond 9 years old, and that
also provide services to those who live in the double digits.
And we have to, yes, and we have to begin with the end in mind and where are we going. So I will say this for those of you who are listening. I'll put it in the links too. We are actually about to release a course on CR Institute done by Keith Story. I don't know if you know Keith, Mike, but he's been doing basically his focus has been broader umbrella ID services through person-centered planning and transition and all of that. So he's made a course for us on behavior analysts who want to work with transition-aged kids. What do you need to know about the law? What do you need to know about curriculum? What do you need to know about adult outcomes? How do you need to negotiate between school systems and adult systems and get those things working together? So I'm really excited that we're going to be able to bring that on board, because I do think a lot of behavior analysts just don't even have an idea about how to begin that kind of a conversation with someone.
Well, you know what's I think important to consider about that is, and Rick, what you said earlier resonated with me, because in graduate school we were able to go in as the behavioral consultant for the school and just essentially show up at someone's door and say, "What do you need help with?" And be like, "Well, this group of kids over here is not doing too well at math," so we would do academic interventions. Right, behavior analytic academic interventions. That was awesome. There's awesome literature in school psychology. Chris Skinner and Stuart Watson and all the guys from that group, but nobody pays for that. Schools don't call you in to do really neat.
Want to pay for it. They don't want to hear what you have to say about it. So.
Right.
Why you do that? No. Help him with his blurts.
It's a funding issue. I don't think it's a lack of caring. I think it's we have people for that. They use a different approach. We need to do for this. But I think it's the same. I think two major considerations, Shannon, are I think the majority, I'm guessing because I don't actually have numbers, but I think the majority of BCBAs are paid through insurance money. Mm-hmm. And that funding has a limited duration related to a child's age. And once that's gone, it's gone. And in my experience, I think reality is during school age, right, from birth to 22, there's no other opportunities after that to receive the same type of services, to receive the same type of intensive instructional opportunities as a whole. I know there are really nice transitional programs. We're doing some stuff with one at Texas Tech that it is a trend, basically from high school to, mid 20s, that they have a short-term 18-month program that's really, really great. And there's others out there, but as a whole, that age group, once you get past that, funding opportunities go down. It's more or less state funds and state waiver programs and things like that. Less, fewer people are doing it. There's fewer options. There's wait lists. There's all these things that interfere with it. And
I see that more on the adult level. At least there's still insurance funding for adolescents up to like 20 or 21 or 25, depending on the state. But I think, I saw an unfortunate meme of these kids in a pool and the parent attending to one child, and it was like, autistic boys, and then someone over like dog paddling with autistic girls, and then at the bottom of it was a skeleton down at the bottom of the pool, and it was autistic adults. And so it's just unfortunate that, like, you're right, the need or the need is there, but the funding and the resources are not, because everyone grows up.
I mean,
yeah,
but it's an odd thing to consider that the need literally never stops. You never get to the point where it's like, this person, there's no chance of gaining any more skills or bettering their life or helping them in some way.
Well, I think there's children that never advance and they do get more skills and their life does improve and get better. But then there are some that will always need supports throughout their life, and for sure.
And there are those of us who did not need any supports until we got older, and now we need constant support, like tech support from my 19-year-old son, things like that.
It's funny, when we first started doing the, conducting the APLs with people, we did it more, the first couple times I did it, and I wish I had now, because it probably just frustrated the people who were being interviewed, but we kind of do it more of an interview kind of style, and there's a lot of material to cover. So, but the feedback that we got regularly, and it was sort of tongue in cheek, but probably coming from a sincere spot, it was always like, I wish I had something like this for my husband, right?
Yeah.
Home skills that he's not doing or whatever it is. But it's quite enlightening to go through that with caregivers, not for their spouse, but a lot of people aren't aware when, am I supposed to be doing this? There's such a, like, most people have such a concern, and whatever the word is that, compels them to make sure that everything is safe and everything is healthy and all needs are met. Sometimes to the point of removing the opportunities for instruction. It's like, I wouldn't say like the care is too much, but it sometimes our need to make sure everything is peaceful and harmonious does remove the opportunities to get kids to do things for themselves that once learned.
I find that as a parent myself.
Well, and people also,
I do that as a parent myself.
Yeah. People prioritize the outcome of instead of teaching the skill, whether you're talking about parents or residential support staff or teachers. I need this floor to be clean, so I'm just going to clean the floor. My own son, the other day, I was picking up his trash that he left on the table again, and I'm griping about it again, and his response to me was, "You're enabling it." I thought, whoa. Wait a minute. Yeah, you're right. And I put the garbage down and let him do it himself. So
versus like, calling your daughter down from her room upstairs where it's like, okay, turn off the light. She's like, are you kidding me? And I'm like, oh my God, I'm my dad.
I just taught my son how to do the dishes. It was a chore that he selected, so he was super excited about it. And then I also apparently failed to just review the discrimination of when the dishwasher is dirty versus clean. And so there was a couple of times where I was, getting a dish out for dinner, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's dirty. So like there is, as a caregiver, there is a time in which you're like, it will require a little bit more on my part to teach the skill, and then, but it benefits the learners eventually. And then, as you as the caregiver, benefits you as well. But
Yeah, I think
Well,
I think teaching functional skills, something my personal experience has been more awareness and appreciation on the part of the learner that
yeah,
they just
that sense of
accomplished something,
accomplishment and pride.
that they can now do something on their own, like an actual sense of pride and accomplishment. And we go to some like kids, teenagers, young adults, houses, and when I show up, they can't wait to show off what they've done. And that's never happened with some matching skills or sorting or those kind of things. Not to downplay the significance of matching, certainly, but you don't get the same appreciation going from, step 16 to 17 as you do when, like you said, someone can now show you what they've done, and it's part of their routine, and it's helpful, and they're doing it, and they're pitching in. Obviously from a behavior analytic perspective, our literature isn't replete with examples of pride, but everybody knows it when they see it. And
one of our products, IBAO, and we had a behavioral view about it. One of the testimonials of her going through learning some of these functional skills was not only the pride and an achievement over I'm doing all of these things for myself during the day. So you have some of those positive reinforcers that are occurring in our environment, but also some negative reinforcement, the removal of her. She said her mother doesn't nag her all the time anymore, right? And so you just think about all of these really cool things that are occurring for this person with the acquisition of some of these, these functional skills that are existing throughout their day. It is a sense of, like, I think you're right. It's a sense of accomplishment and meaningful units of behavior that for some of, those early skills, they're meaningful. They're in a step of where you need to get, but don't profoundly make that bit of an impact where the learner says, like, wow, look how that changed my life.
Yeah,
it's incredible, whether it's putting on socks or getting dressed or toileting. I mean, even really, really basic self-help skills, it can be life-changing, even small number of skills. And I don't know, when we teach those things and you see that, there's just a lot of times a really obvious sense of accomplishment.
Well, I could go with this all day. This is one of my favorite topics in the world, but we are running out of time, and I did want to give you just a couple of minutes at least to talk about the IBAO, just to make sure our listeners know what it is and what you guys are doing.
Yeah, sure. Well, one of the people I mentioned in the question of the day, inspirational Alania Dumatras, she's in Republic of Moldova. This was I flew there, and to be totally honest with you, I wasn't even really sure where it was until I looked it up. It's essentially a region of Romania that the Soviet Union came into and kind of, not literally, but almost literally kind of walled off, changed, took over the bridges, changed the language, changed the signs, and it remained that way for 50 or 60 years. They're not independent. Totally different, societal issues than what we face on a day-to-day basis. Lack of funds, lack of understanding, lack of all these things. So Alania had a child diagnosed with autism. There's absolutely no services there. There weren't any, at least in 2006. So she took it upon herself to create an organization to provide ABA services. They flew me over there to talk about assessment of functional living skills, assessing and teaching functional skills, issues in behavioral assessment and functional analysis. It was awesome because they had Romanian and Russian speaking translators. So this is a room full of 40 dedicated, this is their career. This is what they want to do. None of them are certified. They can't afford it. There's no, at the time, Romanian or Moldovan test centers. I mean, all these different barriers and obstacles to get certification. They finally, like I said, kind of scraped some money together to get a couple of people certified. So this was going to be flying a couple of people to the U.S., doing some on-campus training at FIT, supervision issues, all this kind of stuff. So I was there just a couple of weeks after the BACB announced that they were ending kind of the global certification deal and that you had to reside in the U.S. And they have their reasons for doing it. But I saw firsthand and very freshly the concern and terror, frankly, and loss of hope, and just feeling of this entire group was just kind of crushed, frankly. And I was very, very moved by it. And I wanted to do something to help them out. We've done other international consulting, so I know a little small network of people that do provide behavior analytics services outside the U.S. and seen some of this firsthand and talked to them. And once you start asking people what are the barriers to certification, why are there only 3 people certified as BCBAs in Hungary or in Belgium or in these different places, all the barriers tend to be the same: translation issues, cost issues, educational differences between that and the U.S. system, expense. And it's not just lack of translated exams, right? I mean, it's lack of, you can't get Java in Russian.
Right.
It doesn't get translated that way. And unless there's a special deal with publishers, like you can't just order a Hungarian Cooper book, right? So if you're either forced to know English well enough to study it kind of professionally and at a graduate level, you know what I mean? Or these things don't exist. And I get it from the perspective of the publishers. You can't just release your IP and lose it, because that's a business. So I understand why these things have happened, but at the same time, that is the situation. And it's all over the world. And it was very moving to me, because there's also a lack of training standards, and there's a lack of expectation. And there's so few certified individuals around the world in certain places that the community at large can't discriminate appropriate practice from practice that really kind of falls outside of industry standards of ethics and training and implementation and things like that. So we founded International Behavior Analysis Organization in January of 2020, formed a professional advisory board. And at that time, we really kind of embarked on a creative process to decide what certification standards should be. Really intelligent professional group working together. We considered everything from, autism specific or OBM specific or other kind of practice area specific certifications, ultimately landed on general behavior analysis certifications, one at a behavior analyst level and one at a behavior therapist level. We do have, as part of our requirements, some information about autism and some information about developmental disabilities and things like that. Came up with the requirements for supervision, for education. We have skills testing, both at the behavior analyst level and the behavior therapist level. New behavior analysts have a post-certification mentoring obligation. And so it's been very, very helpful in a lot of places to start establishing some credibility and some legitimacy to the field. It's been helping provide some structure to people who are trying to disseminate good ABA practice in different places where they haven't really had something to kind of build from. And now we're working on translations of all the documentation, the web content, the exams, into all sorts of different languages. It's totally volunteer basis, and that sort of relates back to the inspirational thing that I mentioned before. I know it's kind of cliche, but you literally have dozens and dozens of people acting, thinking globally, acting locally, and they're doing it to help their own communities, not for fame, not for riches, and they're all doing it in a really consistent way. So it's been a really incredible experience to be part of, and to see people kind of take this on their shoulders to get it done, so that the people that are coming after them have these documents to read. So the community has transparency into what should someone providing these services, what should they have as their background, what should they have as their training experiences, what people should be doing and not doing, kind of from an ethical perspective, is something that's literally never been introduced in some places, and it's really cool to see.
Well, it's really humbling to hear the types of issues that get dealt with in other parts of the world, and it certainly sounds like a beautiful mission. Carrie, I was about to wrap up.
Yeah.
So was
Are
there something
you in need of volunteers, like translators or something like that? And if so, where can they contact you?
Secret word number 3, meme.
Yeah, we can definitely.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Thanks for putting that out there. Info@theibao.com. So info@theibao.com. We have some, well underway. There's it's really, I wish, it's maybe a different segment altogether, but there's really, really bright, enthusiastic, intelligent people on our advisory board, and they're doing a really heck of a good job. But it is volunteer basis, and they all have other jobs and concerns and families and things like that. So there's definitely room for people to get involved if they want to. Right now, the main goals of the organization are translation and dissemination and education about what it is and what it's not. There's a lot of confusion everywhere, frankly, about the difference between certification and licensure, like regulation of the field versus certification of somebody. Well. Yeah, there is, and there's some good reasons why the lines have been blurred a little bit, but so it is. A lot of this is just being in a position to support the people who are actually sort of boots on the ground, making a difference, educating and disseminating and correcting and helping where they're at. I mean, they're starting their own chapters and societies. They're organizing themselves, just step by step by step. It is, it's fascinating and really, really satisfying to watch and be a part of.
Well, we will definitely, we always have a resources page. I'm probably going to hit you up for some of your references that you've thrown out and make sure that everybody has access to all of that. And we'll put the info link there as well. But I think our time has come to an end. It has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for joining us, Mike.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate the opportunity to talk about things I care deeply about.
I'm sure that we will be talking to you more as time goes by. And Rick and Carrie, second season. We've done it again.
Have a good one.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us.
All right.
Thanks for watching this episode of the Behavioral View. To get your CEU, follow the link in the instructions below. You can then go to the attendance verification quiz, where you'll enter in the secret words and pay the CEU fee to generate your certificate. You've already done the work, you may as well get the credit.